I never expected much from my father. Growing up, he made it painfully clear that I was never his priority. My half-brother Jason was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He got the best clothes, the newest gadgets, and the unwavering support of our father, no matter what he did. Meanwhile, I was just there, the son he barely acknowledged. Still, some foolish part of me hoped that one day things would change. Maybe if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself, he'd finally see me. He'd finally care. But no matter what I did, Jason was always the one who mattered more. Then my father died. It happened suddenly, a heart attack in his sleep. I wasn't devastated, not in the way a child should be when they lose a parent. There was a dull ache, but mostly there was a strange numbness, the kind that comes from years of already feeling like you don't belong. The funeral was a blur. People whispered about what a great man he was. Jason soaked up the attention, shaking hands, accepting condolences like some grieving prince. I stayed quiet, standing off to the side, feeling like an outsider at my own father's farewell. But the real blow came later, at the reading of his will. I sat across from the lawyer, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair as he read out the words that shattered what little hope I had left. To my beloved son Jason, I leave everything: my house, my savings, my business, and all my assets. To my other son, nothing. Nothing. Not a single cent. The words felt like a slap. Even though I should have expected it, it still knocked the air from my lungs. The lawyer wouldn't meet my eyes, probably uncomfortable with how cold and cruel it was. Jason, on the other hand, looked like he was barely holding back a smirk. "Guess that settles it," he said, stretching like he had just finished a long day of work. Work he never did. I don't even remember leaving that office. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind was racing. Years of neglect, of being overlooked, of being treated like I didn't exist. This was the final confirmation. My father didn't just favor Jason, he had erased me completely. But here's the thing, Jason was a leech. He had never worked a day in his life, never paid a bill, never been responsible for anything. He thought inheriting everything meant he had won. He had no idea that I was about to take it all away from him. My father made it clear that I was an afterthought. Jason, on the other hand, was his pride and joy. Maybe it was because he was older. Maybe it was because Jason's mother, the woman my father actually loved, had passed away when he was young. Whatever the reason, Dad treated him like he could do no wrong. It started small when we were kids. If Jason broke something, I got blamed. If he wanted a new toy, he got it, and I got whatever hand-me-downs he had outgrown. Birthdays, Christmas. Jason always got the expensive gifts while I got practical things. Socks, school supplies, things that felt like obligations rather than thoughtful presents. By the time we were teenagers, the favoritism wasn't just obvious, it was blatant. Jason crashed his car. Dad bought him another one the next day. I had to save up for my first car, working extra hours at a part-time job while Jason spent his weekends partying. If Jason failed a class, Dad hired a private tutor. If I needed help, I was told to figure it out. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need my father's approval. But deep down, it hurt. Things only got worse as we got older. Jason coasted through life without lifting a finger. He never had a real job, never worked for anything. Meanwhile, I built my own life from scratch. I put myself through college with scholarships and side jobs, while Jason partied his way through a business degree Dad had fully paid for. I worked my way up in my career, while Jason bounced from one failed investment to another, always relying on our father to bail him out. And yet, despite all of this, Dad still acted like I was the disappointment. I never confronted him about it. What was the point? He had made his choice long ago, so I focused on myself, on my work, on building something of my own. I had my own apartment, a steady job, and a life that, while not glamorous, was fully mine. Then Dad got sick. I wasn't expecting a heartfelt reunion or some dramatic deathbed confession. That wasn't who he was. But some part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, facing his own mortality would make him reflect on how he had treated me. It didn't. Instead, he spent his final months making sure Jason would be taken care of, paying off his debts, setting up his finances, ensuring that his golden child wouldn't have to struggle a day in his life. I was barely a footnote in his final days. And then came the will. I sat in that office listening to the lawyer's words, feeling my stomach twist into knots. I wasn't expecting much, but nothing, not a single cent. It was like he had erased me completely. Jason leaned back in his chair, looking far too smug. "Guess Dad knew who really deserved everything," he said, stretching like he had just finished a hard day's work. Something inside me snapped. I had spent my entire life being pushed aside, overlooked, treated like I didn't matter, but not anymore. Jason thought he had won. He thought he had finally cemented his place as the sole heir, the only son that mattered, but he had no idea what was coming. Jason thought he had won. He walked out of that lawyer's office like he was some kind of king, like he had finally gotten what he always deserved. He didn't even look back at me. I could have walked away. I could have accepted it, moved on with my life, and let him rot in his newfound wealth. But I didn't. See, Jason was a fool. He had always been a fool. He had never worked for anything in his life, never had to figure things out on his own. He had our father to clean up his messes, pay off his debts, and hand him a comfortable life on a silver platter. But our father was gone now, and Jason had no idea how to keep what he'd just inherited. That's when I had an idea. I started digging. I reached out to a few people, some old family friends, some business contacts Dad had dealt with over the years. And the more I looked, the more I realized something. Jason was screwed. It turned out our father wasn't as financially secure as everyone thought. His business had been bleeding money for years. The only thing keeping it afloat was sheer reputation and the fact that our father had been willing to throw his own savings into it to keep it alive. But with him gone, there was no one to cover the losses. And Jason, he had no idea how to run a business. But here's the real kicker. The house, our childhood home, the place where Jason now lived and flaunted his victory. It wasn't fully paid off. Dad had taken out a second mortgage on it to cover some of Jason's previous financial mistakes. And now that Dad was gone, the bank was expecting Jason to start making payments. Payments he had no way of covering. It was only a matter of time before everything started falling apart. So I waited. I kept my distance, pretending to be completely unaffected by the will, acting like I had moved on. Meanwhile, Jason continued living the high life, spending money like it would never run out. But reality caught up to him fast. A few months after Dad's passing, the cracks started to show. The business was struggling, bills were piling up, and Jason, ever the reckless idiot, had taken out more loans to keep things running. Then came the moment I was waiting for. One night I got a call from Jason. He sounded desperate, pathetic even. He tried to act casual, but I could hear the panic in his voice. "Hey, so, funny thing, I might be in a bit of a situation," he said, letting out a forced laugh. "The bank's being weird about the house. Something about, overdue payments and, possible foreclosure." I almost laughed out loud. This was it. This was the moment everything came crashing down on him. I played it cool. "Wow, that sounds rough," I said. "What are you going to do?" Jason hesitated. I could tell he hated what he was about to say next. "Well, I was thinking, since you're doing pretty well for yourself, maybe you could help out. Family and all." Family. That was rich, coming from the guy who had smirked at me when I was written out of the will. But I wasn't ready to make my move just yet. I pretended to think about it. "I don't know, man. That's a big ask." Jason's voice grew more desperate. "Come on, dude. It's just a temporary thing. Once I get the business back on track, I'll pay you back. He wouldn't. We both knew that. But I wasn't interested in lending him money. I was interested in taking everything from him. So I set my plan in motion. I made a few calls, pulled a few strings, and a week later, when Jason was scrambling to stop the bank from foreclosing on the house, I did the one thing he never saw coming. I bought it. Jason had no idea what was coming. For weeks, I had watched him scramble, desperately trying to hold on to the house. He tried everything, begging the bank for an extension, looking for quick loans, even trying to sell off some of Dad's remaining business assets. But Jason had never been responsible in his life. He didn't know how to manage finances, let alone navigate the mess he had inherited. Then came the day he found out I had bought it. He stormed into my office, his face red with rage. The door slammed behind him, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before: fear. "You bought the house?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "You?" I leaned back in my chair, completely unfazed. "Yeah, it was a smart investment." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You knew I was trying to fix things. You knew I just needed more time." I tilted my head, pretending to think. Kind of like how I needed Dad's help my whole life and never got it. Like how I was left with nothing, and you just sat there smirking. Funny how things come full circle. He looked like he had been slapped. For the first time, it seemed like he was realizing that he wasn't untouchable, that for once in his life, there was no one to bail him out. "You can't do this," he muttered, shaking his head. "This house was meant for me. Dad left it to me." I exhaled sharply, standing up and walking around my desk until I was standing directly in front of him. "No, Jason, Dad left everything to you. He made it very clear that I wasn't a part of his plans. He made his choice, and now I've made mine." I took my phone from my pocket, opened an email, and turned the screen toward him. "You have 30 days to leave." Jason's face paled as he read the notice. An official eviction letter. I had wasted no time filing the paperwork. He had a month to get out before the bank, and now I, as the legal owner, took full possession of the house. His mouth opened and closed like he wanted to argue, but he had nothing left to say. His entire life, he had been protected by Dad's money, Dad's influence, and Dad's decisions. Now, without that shield, he was just another man who had burned through everything and had nothing left. "Where the hell am I supposed to go?" he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. I shrugged. "Not my problem." He stood there, his breathing heavy, his fists clenching and unclenching. Then, in a final act of pathetic desperation, he tried one last angle: pity. "Come on, man," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "We're brothers. We're all we've got left. You're really going to throw me out onto the street?" I crossed my arms. "Let me ask you something, Jason. If it had been the other way around, if I had been the one left with nothing and you were in my position, would you have helped me?" His lips pressed together, his jaw tightening. I let the silence stretch, watching as his face contorted into something ugly. He didn't need to say it. We both knew the answer. "No," I finally said for him. "You wouldn't have. And that's why I don't owe you a damn thing." His nostrils flared, his face flushing with rage once again. "You think you're better than me?" he spat. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I shook my head. "No, Jason, I think this makes us even." With that, I stepped aside, motioning toward the door. "Now get out of my office." Jason glared at me, breathing hard like he wanted to throw a punch. But he didn't, because for the first time in his life, he knew he had already lost. 30 days later, he was gone. I made sure of it. I hired movers to clear out the house after his time was up. Anything he hadn't packed, I donated it. He tried to drag his feet, tried to get more time, but I shut it down. I sent legal notices, followed every proper channel, and when the deadline hit, I changed the locks. Jason had no job, no savings, no backup plan. He tried crashing on friends' couches, But people got tired of him fast. The golden boy, the one who had always looked down on others, was now the one begging for help. And as for me, I thrived. I moved into the house, not because I needed to, but because it felt poetic. The place my father had refused to leave to me was now mine, and Jason was the one left with nothing. One night, months later, I got a call. It was Jason. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was weak, drained of all its usual confidence. "I messed up, man." I didn't respond. "I don't know what to do," he continued. "I tried to fix things. I did. But nothing's working. I lost everything." I exhaled slowly, gripping my phone a little tighter. "Yeah," I said. "You did." He sniffed on the other end of the line. "I don't know where to go. I don't have anything left." I waited a few seconds before speaking. "Not my problem." Then I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. Jason was gone. For months, I had watched him unravel, and now he had finally hit rock bottom. After I hung up on him that night, he didn't call again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had been bouncing from couch to couch, struggling to find any sort of stability. The golden child, the one who had everything handed to him, was now just another man who had lost it all. And I thrived. Moving into the house wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming something that was denied to me my entire life. I renovated it, made it my own. I turned my old, barely used childhood room into a home office. I repainted the walls, replaced the old furniture, and got rid of anything that reminded me of the past. It wasn't a shrine to my father's favoritism anymore. It was my house now. At first, I thought there would be a lingering bitterness, that I would still feel the ghost of my father's absence in every room. But surprisingly, I didn't. Instead, I felt something else. Peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in Jason's shadow. I wasn't waiting for scraps of love or validation from a father who had never truly seen me. I had taken control, and it felt damn good. Then, a few months later, Jason showed up at my door. I opened it to find him standing there, looking nothing like the arrogant, self-assured brother I had grown up with. His clothes were wrinkled, his face gaunt, his once perfectly styled hair now unkempt. He looked like a man who had been chewed up and spit out by life. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice void of emotion. He swallowed hard. I don't have anywhere to go." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sounds like a you problem." He flinched but didn't back down. "I know I screwed up. I know I was an asshole. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but..." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just need help. Just a place to stay until I get back on my feet." I watched him for a moment, taking in the sheer desperation in his eyes. A few years ago, I might have considered it. I might have felt guilty enough to let him in. But I wasn't that person anymore. I shook my head. "No." His face fell. "Come on, man. We're family." I let out a short laugh. "Family? You didn't think we were family when you let Dad cut me out of everything. You didn't think we were family when you sat there smiling while I was left with nothing. You only care about family now because you need something." His shoulders slumped. He had nothing left to argue with. I sighed. "Look, Jason, I don't hate you. I don't even care about what happened anymore. But I've moved on. You need to figure out how to do the same." He stood there for a few more seconds, as if waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Yeah, okay." And then he turned and walked away. I closed the door behind him, feeling no sadness, no regret, just finality. That was the last time I saw Jason. I heard through the grapevine that he eventually found a job, a low-paying entry-level gig that was miles beneath what he had once thought he was entitled to. But at least he was working. At least he was finally learning what it meant to stand on his own. As for me, life was better than ever. I had everything I had built for myself, everything that was mine. I had a career I was proud of, a home that was truly my own, and most importantly, I had peace. For the first time in my life, I was free.